There it is. And yes, my friends, minty fresh. Look at that, minty fresh, man. That is awesome. And it's minty fresh. Yeah, minty fresh, man. Minty fresh. Yes, it is. This one's minty fresh, man. Minty fresh. Yeah, minty fresh, man. Wicked.
G'day all, Simon here, Explosive Action, and I am here with a contest entry video today. This is a video response to Brendan Von Doom, who is holding a competition entitled Give Me Something Brutal, and that's up to interpretation. Is it a sound? Is it a cover art? It's up to us to choose. And I've decided to go on a journey here through the brutal history of my upbringing in terms of metal. The competition is to win the latest CD from In Malice's Wake, who is a thrash band that I'm not overly familiar with, but everyone's talking about, and I'm pretty excited to check them out. So, but anyway, in the background, we are listening to something incredibly brutal. This is Carcass, Reek of Putrefaction. It's the original tape. It warps, it warbles, it's got all kinds of flutter and noise, but man, if you're going to listen to Reek of Putrefaction, I'll fold it out there, you may as well listen to it subpar. I mean, it already sounds like garbage, so what am I going to do to make it worse? But anyway, fantastic album, Reek of Putrefaction from Carcass, and definitely something very brutal. But what we're going to do here is go through some of the albums that I discovered in my metal journey, and I consider these, at the time, pretty brutal, and some of them definitely still are incredibly brutal. And the first one happens to be called Brutality. So we get to tick off two things here with that, the title and the music. So this album, this one is Screams of Anguish, and it came out in, I think, 93. These guys were Floridian death metal. They only broke up, I think, this year or last year. They were going for quite some time. And yeah, these guys were definitely the underdogs of the Floridian death metal scene. The sound is probably similar to Monstrosity, but you know, all of the Floridian bands had a bit of a thing, a bit of a style that was kind of similar. And I think Brutality definitely had the heaviest vocals, and I think the guitar tone is something that just really appealed to me. So yeah, I mean, this album is an absolute ball terror. This one is the follow-up called When the Sky Turns Black. This one is even heavier, it's even doomier, and it's got a Black Sabbath cover of Electric Funeral, and it's like the fifth track, it's right in the middle, and god damn is it a heavy, brutal version of that song. So yes, Brutality, definitely included, and part of my foundational metal upbringing. Next one, man, Suffocation. Wow. Pierced From Within was one of the first American death metal bands I heard after Morbid Angel, and after Cannibal Corpse. So I heard Eaten Back to Life, and that was pretty thrashy and gory, and it's pretty brutal. Then I heard Morbid Angel's Domination, and that thing was even heavier. But then I was turned on to this album. I don't even remember how I was turned on to this album. Nobody I know liked this band. I was probably turned on to it from early internet days. Suffocation, Pierced From Within. I had never heard anything as thick and just downright brutal as this thing. It still holds up for early days brutal death metal before it all turned into pig squeals. Just monstrous riffs, absolutely thick, crunching. Even the bass is a heavy sound on this one. So, look, when it comes down to it, these days I will probably reach for Effigy of the Forgotten more. The songs were just a bit more unique, but this thing's got depths of depravity on it, and that is just nuts. And of course the opening, Pierced From Within, is just a heavily brutal song. So yeah, had to include this one, Pierced From Within, from Suffocation. A lot of things happened around about 98, 99 for me. That was definitely a turning point in finding heavy music. And, well, then I found Incantation. I was getting into relapse bands. I think I must have found them on websites or something. As I said, early internet was doing a lot for me. Incantation, I hadn't heard of them up to this point, and they had just released Diabolical Conquest, so this was a new album for me. And I remember going to Utopia Records and picking it up, completely unheard of. I just saw the cover and it was metal, and we're going to go get an Incantation album. And man, this thing was way more brutal than I was ready for. It took me quite a few listens, and I put it down, and I came back to it over a period of a few months to really start digesting it. This really took me to the next echelon of understanding death metal, because it is just a ferocious sea of blast beats. The vocals are gurgly and down. When you compare it to the bands that I'd already talked about, it feels more, atonal and singular note. Now, obviously, it's not. Incantation is an incredibly intricate band, but you need to get the ears for it, and I didn't get them yet. So for me, it was supremely brutal and a bit too much, but eventually got into it, and this is one of my favorite albums of all time. All Incantation's fantastic, but their first few, pretty much up to Diabolical Conquest, are just untouchable. So yeah, Incantation, brutal as hell. And here's a band that I was there for when there was lots of noise about them. Again, another relapse band, and wow, we're talking about Nile, Amongst the Catacombs of Nefer-en-Ka. This, when it came out, I heard, I think it was, Bara Edenazu. I think that track was circulating around. Might have been being played on, might have been getting play on our youth broadcaster, Triple J Radio. That might have been how I heard it on 3 Hours of Power, late night. But however I did hear this, I was completely floored by the drumming, especially, and the whole Egyptian theme, because me, right at this time, was obsessed with Stargate. So you get Stargate and Pyramids, and you get brutal death metal that was going above Suffocation. Man, and I was hooked. I played this completely straight for a year. Pretty much nothing but this. It was in my Discman. I was playing it all the time. Amongst the Catacombs of Nefer-en-Ka, and it is still the Nile I reach for the most. I like pretty much all Nile, but yeah, this is the one I'm always going to go picking up. So yeah, this is my original copy that I got back in 99. I think this was 99, wasn't it? 98, back in 98. And yep, it's fantastic. It is completely fantastic. The dual vocals, or is there even 3 vocal styles in this? I can't even remember. This was just completely floored me. So yeah, that was Nile. We're going to stay in Australia for the next one. Man, when this came out, I did not know what to think at all. Sadistic Execution with Chaos. This thing was mental. Just absolutely mental. These guys, they didn't know if they were death metal or black metal or just fuck you metal. I don't know what was going on. The track Volcanic Violence on this got some airplay on Triple J Radio that I mentioned, and it was just unhinged. The vocals were just barked out. The guitars sounded like they weren't properly tuned half the time. The drumming was falling off a cliff. The whole thing was crazy, and it took me so long to work out what was going on. And I picked up the album and I bought the shirt, and I saw them a couple of times live. They played in a pub that was in the house that I grew up, just down the road. Like, I could walk to that pub. I saw them there once. Just nuts. I mean, the band are renowned for being fairly crazy. Rock, the singer, was known for being pretty crazy, and it came through in the music. And yeah, Sadistic Execution. I mean, all of their stuff is pretty crazy, especially up to and including Chaos. The bass work on this from Dave Slave is something I had never heard. Like, it was just like mental, I guess. I don't know what else to say about this thing, but it was heavily brutal music. And yeah, it even says on the back here, we don't worship Satan, Satan worships us. These guys were, taking the piss as much as Bloodduster were. Nothing serious about them. But Voltage by Sadism, fucked up and buried, that final track. Just crazy. Absolutely crazy stuff. So there you go. Sadistic Execution, Australian, represent. Bit of black metal. So I was into, Emperor and Mayhem, and that stuff was obviously pretty heavy stuff. I, hadn't been that well versed into it at this point, and just sort of, feeling it out a bit. And I heard of a band called Marduk, and I had their Nightwing album, and that was pretty ferocious. And I enjoyed it, and I was looking forward to their next album. And that's when Panzer Division Marduk came out. I wasn't expecting the absolute chaos of this thing. It is just a blitzkrieg. I don't remember how long the album goes for, but it's not going to be very long. It's like, 8 tracks? 8 tracks of nothing but insane blasts. And the track 502, I think was like, I think I heard at the time like it won an award or was in a record for being some of the fastest drumming. I don't know how true that story is, but I totally believe it. And the brutal war themes of the entire thing. And then the song titles, Christ Raping Black Metal, and my favourite, Fist Fucking God's Planet. Can you get more brutal than that? And it's got a freaking tank on the cover. This was, and still holds up to me to be some of the most ridiculously fast and brutal Swedish black metal. I always stand by this album. So many people look at the catalogue of Marduk and they don't like this one because it's just almost a grindcore album. It's so ridiculous, and it is just one song over and over. But I love it. I completely love it. Along with their debut album, this is the one that I turn to the most. Panzer Division Marduk, completely brutal black metal. And so at this point I really just started listening to anything I could find. And these guys came out of nowhere. Eternal Suffering, I heard about them through a zine, and they were on a new label called Extremities, and I started to talk to the guy that ran that label a little bit on early internet, and I got a copy of the CD. Now I only just got this back in the last week, so I don't know what happened to my old copy. I must have sold it, but anyway. Eternal Suffering. So, brutal death metal, but what stood out for me on this one, this was the first time I really heard guitar tone and overall production this supremely heavy. It was crystal clear, and it was just unrelenting in the actual tonal qualities of the music. But as well as that, this was really some of the first incredibly ridiculous brutal death metal breakdowns I ever heard. I mean, have a listen to this. You see what I mean? I guess the dance heads would call it the drop. I don't know. I don't care. But god damn, this is a brutal album, and it is so much fun to listen to. Eternal Suffering. The only thing bad about this one with Drowning in Tragedy is the incredibly boring cover. But I believe there's a reissue that has improved it. There is something there. You just can't see it. It's very very faded, and it's like statues and things. I don't know. But it doesn't matter. Drowning in Tragedy from Eternal Suffering. It starts off with a Mr. Rogers quote that leads beautifully into the opening of the first track, which just pummels you for a few seconds and then bang, hits you with that breakdown. From here I started to listen to the things like the first Skinless album. I found bands like Deaden, and I got really into brutal death metal for a while. Disgorge, bands like that. Last Days of Humanity. Man, that album was brutal. But anyway, Eternal Suffering, fantastic. And the last one I'm going to go through is probably one of my favourites from what we've just looked at, and it covers off brutal album covers as well. This is Impaled, The Dead Shall Dead Remain. Oh man. It's like I was saying, I was getting into the really brutal death metal stuff, and this isn't so much that, but it had the imagery of Carcass, of these guys. And you know, I was so much into Carcass, and Carcass were no longer a thing. They had broken up, and you know, and they left with Swan Song, which was not, you know, Reek of Putrefaction. So when a band like these guys came along with this thing and that cover, I was hooked. I mean, look at the back; it's just a bunch of toilets, ridiculous. Gore and medical themed, brutal death metal, a little bit of melody in there, but the riffs on this thing are savage. The fourth track, Trocar, that's just a headbanger. It's completely amazing. The track after the intro, Feces of Death, is fantastic. Like the whole thing is great, and Impaled became a very important band to me. Mondo Medical, the album after this one, is in my top 10 of all time. I'm not kidding, like, amazing. And for those that don't know, but I'm assuming you all do, Impaled were sort of a side project of Exhumed. I think at least two members of Exhumed formed Impaled. So there was, you know, lots of co-tours and things like that for a while. And yeah, completely amazing band. Brutal cover art, brutal album. And anyway, that is my entry for Brendan Von Doom's competition. I will leave a link down below. So go check out his channel, and good luck to all the other people entering. Keep it brutal.